Hey guys, now we're going to learn about substances and mixtures. And these are two ways that we classify matter. Classifying means that we're going to put stuff into groups. And the reason we do this is just so that things are easier to talk about. For instance, dogs is kind of a classic example because you can think of all these different breeds of dogs, but yet we can all put them in the same group that we call dogs because they all have very similar properties. They all have four legs, they look pretty much the same, they have fur, give birth to live young, etc. There are lots of different properties that make them the same in many ways, and yet we can distinguish between all these breeds. There are certain dogs that have characteristics and we set them apart from others and give them a name. Now we're going to do the same thing with matter, and there are two main groups that we classify matter into: substances and mixtures. And it basically boils down to this: substances cannot be physically separated. You can't take whatever tool you have, you cannot separate a substance into two different things. Won't happen. A mixture is something that can be physically separated. So we can sit down with our hands with some kind of tool, with something, and with a mixture we can get two different things out of the mixture. That's not true for a substance. And this has to do with the nature of atoms. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what the atoms in a substance and a mixture look like. So let's start with a substance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box, and then I'm going to draw what the atoms in there look like. So with a substance, we might have the atoms look like this. In this case, there's really only one type of atom in there. And what I'll do is I'll use different colors for different types of atoms. So here, there's really only one type of atom. No matter how I separate it, imagine I take a pair of tweezers and I can move these around or something. There's no way to separate this into two different groups. Now imagine, forgive me, I'm going to have to grab a different color here. Imagine the atoms look like this. And if you're familiar at all with any chemistry from anywhere else, you might recognize that what I'm drawing are water molecules. Each one of the red atoms would represent a hydrogen atom. Each one of the blue ones, an oxygen. And what's happened here is that if you'll have to look very carefully, I'm sorry, I should have drawn this bigger maybe, is that if you look, each one of these hydrogens are joined up with an oxygen. They're stuck together. And even if I had a really, really tiny pair of tweezers and I reached in there, if I grabbed this and moved it around, the hydrogen would stay with the oxygen. There's no way to physically separate them. Any way I move this around, I'm always going to end up with these same groups stuck together. That's what it means to be a substance. I can never physically separate these. Now with a mixture, let's take a look at that. That is not necessarily the case. So this is a mixture, and again I'm going to draw a box, and I should probably finish spelling that. I'll draw a box, and inside we have whatever's in our mixture. Let's say our mixture is air. And in the air you have, I'll use blue for oxygen again. You have these oxygen molecules. The oxygen that you're breathing actually occurs as a pair, O2. So it's two oxygen atoms stuck together. And they're stuck together just like we talked about substances being stuck together. I can't really separate them. But mixed in with this is nitrogen. Now, I'm switching up. I'm using red for nitrogen on this case. And the nitrogen is grouped like that as well. It's grouped as N2. Now notice if I was careful about this, then I could take, and imagine my really tiny tweezers that I can grab atoms with, I could take and I could separate, and I could pull all the blue oxygen over here and all the red nitrogen over there. I could separate these two into two groups. Physically, I could just move them around and get two different substances out of this. This is what it means to be a mixture. A mixture can be physically separated. By just moving atoms around, I can get two different substances out of them. And that's the key difference, really the only difference between substances and mixtures. Substances cannot be physically separated. Mixtures can be.